Now open your spirals and turn to a blank page. I want you to write down these notes that you see on the screen. So just to recap, people are talking about the amount of flowers that are at the hardware store. We've learned about Dolores, a mysterious woman that works there. We know that she's a little rough around the edges. She has facial hair and a tattoo. But most importantly, we learned about a new character named Ernie. He has a mental disability, but we learned that he is very interested in gardening, that his mother has just died, and that he likes Dolores. Then one day, when Ernie was watching through the window, he noticed that Jack was ripping open several sleek little packages and emptying them into the ground. Ernie panicked and ran to his room, but the box of burpee seeds was still there on his table, untouched. He grabbed it, slid it under his bed, and then went back through the house and out into the garden as if he had done this every day of his life. He stood beside Jack, watching him empty seed packages into the soft black soil, and as the packages were emptied, Ernie asked for them, holding out his hand, his eyes on the photographs of red radishes and purple eggplant. Jack handed the empty packages over with a smile, and with that gesture became Ernie's best friend. Jack tried to explain to Ernie that the seeds would grow into vegetables, but Ernie could not believe this until he saw it come true. And when he did, he looked all the more intently at the packages of zinnias and cornflowers, and the rest hidden beneath his bed. He thought more deeply about them, but he could not carry them to the garden. He could not let the garden have his seeds. That was the first year in the large white house. The second year, Ernie saw Dolores, and after that, he thought of nothing else but her and of the photographs of flowers beneath his bed. Jack decided to take Ernie downtown for breakfast every Wednesday morning to ease him into the world outside that of the group home. They left very early, at 5:45 a.m., so that there would be few people and almost no traffic to frighten Ernie and make him beg for his room. Jack and Ernie drove to the Big Boy restaurant, which sat across the street from Stan's Hardware. There they ate eggs and bacon and French toast among those who work demanded those whose work demanded rising before the sun. Bus drivers, policemen, nurses, mill workers. Their first time in the Big Boy, Ernie was too nervous to eat. The second time, he could eat, but he couldn't look up. The third time, he not only ate everything on his plate, but he lifted his head and he looked out the window of the Big Boy restaurant towards Stan's Hardware across the street. And there he saw the dark-haired woman in jeans and a black t-shirt unlocking the front door of the building. And that was the moment Ernie started loving Dolores and thinking about giving up his seeds to the soft black soil of Jack's garden. Love is such a mystery, and when it strikes the heart of one as mysterious as Ernie himself, it can hardly be spoken of. Ernie could not explain to Jack why he went directly into his room later that morning, pulled the box of burpee seeds from under his bed, and then grabbed Jack's hand in the kitchen and walked with him to the garden where Ernie had come to believe things would grow. Ernie handed the packets of seeds, one by one, to Jack, who stood in silent admiration of the lovely photographs, before asking Ernie several times, "Are you sure you want to plant these?" Ernie was sure. It didn't take him very long, and when the seeds all lay under the moist black earth, Ernie carried his empty packages inside the house and spent the rest of the day spreading them across his bed in different arrangements. Sometimes Ernie could be seen twerking it right there in his bedroom. That was in June, and for the next several Wednesdays, at 7 a.m., Ernie watched every movement of the dark-haired woman behind the lighted windows of Stan's Hardware. Jack watched Ernie watch Dolores, and discreetly said nothing. When Ernie's flowers began growing in July, Ernie spent most of his time in the garden. He would watch the garden for hours, as if he expected it to suddenly move, or impress him with a quick trick. The fragile green stems of the flowers stood uncertainly in the soil like baby colts on their first legs, but the young plants performed no magic for Ernie's eyes. They saved their shows for the middle of the night, and the next day surprised Ernie with tender small blooms in all the colors the photographs had promised. The flowers grew fast and hardy, and one early Wednesday morning, when they looked as big and bright as their pictures on the empty packages, Ernie pulled a glass canning jar off a dusty shelf in the basement of his house. He washed the jar, half filled it with water, and then carried it to the garden, where he placed in it one of every kind of flower he had grown. He met Jack at the car and then rode off to the big boy with the jar of flowers held tight between his small hands. Jack told him it was a beautiful bouquet. When they reached the door of the big boy, Ernie stopped and pulled at Jack's arms, pointing to the building across the street. "Okay," Jack said, and he led Ernie to the front door of Stan's Hardware. It was 6 a.m., and the building was still dark. Ernie set the clear mason jar full of flowers under the sign that read, "Closed," and then he smiled at Jack and followed him back across the street to get breakfast. When Dolores arrived at 7 and picked up the jar of zinnias and cornflowers and nasturtiums and marigolds and asters and 4 o'clocks, Ernie and Jack were watching her from a booth in the big boy. Each had a wide smile on his face as Dolores put her nose to the flowers. Ernie giggled. They watched the lights of their hardware store come up, and then saw Dolores place the clear mason jar on the ledge of the front window. They both drove home, still smiling. All the rest of that summer, Ernie left a jar of flowers every Wednesday morning at the front door of Stan's Hardware. Neither Dick Wilcox nor Dolores could figure out why the flowers kept coming, and each of them assumed someone had a crush on the other. But the flowers had an effect on them anyway. Dick started spending more time out on the floor making conversation with customers, while Dolores stopped wearing t-shirts to work. She even decided to get a tattoo of a Glock on her face. Instead, wore crisp white blouses with the sleeves rolled back off her wrist. Occasionally, she would put on a bracelet. By summer's end, Jack and Ernie had become very good friends, and when the flowers in the garden behind their house began to wither, and Ernie's face began to grow gray as he watched them, Jack brought home one bright day in the late September a great long box. Ernie followed Jack as he carried it down to the basement and watched as Jack pulled a long glass tube from the box and attached this tube to the wall above the table. When Jack plugged in the tube's electric cord, a soft lavender light washed the room. "Sunshine," said Jack. Then he went back to his car for a smaller box. He carried this down to the basement, where Ernie still stood staring at the strange light. Jack handed Ernie a small box, and when Ernie opened it, he found more little packages of seeds than he could count. with new kinds of photographs on the slick paper. Violets, Jack said, pointing to one of them. And then he and Ernie went outside to get some dirt. And then Jack poured a pound of dirt on top of Ernie's head and said, "Yippee-ki-yay." Here is a poem by Valerie Worth called Zinnias. Zinnias, stout and stiff, stand no nonsense their colors. Stare, their leaves go straight out. Their petals, just like clipboard cardboard, round in neat flat rings. Even cut and bunched, arranged to please us, in the house, in water, they will hardly wilt. I know someone like Zinnias. I wish I were like Zinnias.